Sergio, there's been a lot of excitement about advanced air mobility. So many promises of revolutionizing the way people move, where they move, when they move, reducing traffic congestion. Some companies are advertising giving back billions of hours to people to spend with their families or spend on Netflix or whatever they want to do, et cetera, et cetera. Now, let me lay out the bear case for advanced air mobility, and I have a laundry list here. So I'm looking at companies trying to squeeze a 7 to 10 years development program for conventional aircraft into a 5 to 6 years for an in-flight morphine fly-by-wire battery-powered object that looks like a crossbreed between a small airplane and a small helicopter. They're trying to reproduce the failed light jet airtaxi experience of the late 2000s. Some of them are building business cases assuming mass adoption, 10 years, 10 hours of usage per day, day in, day out, no weather interruption or airspace saturation, which leads to utilization rates comparable to the single-aisle jetliners. The payload is between 8% and 15%. They intend to use infrastructure that does not exist and will be extremely expensive to build. They're all promising to be as competitive as ground transportation when it comes to price. They all brag about the net flight time between two vertiports, but almost never mention the entire door-to-door travel time. They're adding thousands of aircrafts, all needing pilots, or most of them needing pilots, even when the airlines have a hard time finding and retaining pilots. And since we're in an investors channel here, so if we look at the 5 years return on the stock market, like putting your money in the S&P 500 would have made you wealthier and less stressed out. So if we take the example of Archer and Joby, they come, and that's data driven, they come at 100% cost of opportunity compared to the S&P 500. So I'm being obviously provocative here, but it may seem like a fantasy driven by a Silicon Valley type of mindset, leading to a bubble that will maybe burn a lot of people, but make founders filthy rich in the process. So over to you, Sergio. What is the bull case for advanced air mobility?
So let's start. First things first. We're not. If you want to know bull case, we're with the wrong people. We've always been the people that trying to bring reality into the understanding of this industry. For sure, we believe in this industry. Otherwise, what's the point? But at the same time, we're not the one that thinks that this is the cure-all for congestion in the world. So you made a lot of good points, and I think all of those points are extremely valid. So I can come and tell you, oh no, what you said is wrong. Absolutely not. Everything you said is correct. But again, we call it this the industry of it depends, because it really depends, and we need to go into detail. So if we start with, for example, the development time, I would agree with you that this is new and novel technology. The way that the regulators certify technology is by incremental steps. And so we've always known in aviation that is a little bit like solving any motion problem. You make sure 1 degree of freedom is available and everything else doesn't move. So that's how you make it easy. In this case, we already have a few degrees of freedom that are changing at the same time. However, we also need to understand that not every single company is at the same development time. So, for example, Joby was funded in 2009. And they have been developing this vehicle probably since 2012, 2015. So we're talking almost a 10-year time frame to develop this vehicle. Volocopter, similar, 2012. So not all companies were born 2 days ago, and they're trying to certify an airplane as quickly as possible. And this is the other part. Advanced air mobility is one single acronym, but it is a very comprehensive word. It's a little bit like when you say people. It's simple to say people. It's people. Everyone's different. On the other side, for example, you were talking about the cost. And again, this is the other part that's very interesting, and it's an interesting mentality here. If you walk into a Best Buy and you see a 96-inch OLED on the wall that costs $29,000, you don't look at that TV and say, this is for the filthy rich, this is inequality. No, you look at the TV and say, please go buy it so I can buy my 77-inch or my 65-inch for cheaper. And so I think we should adopt the same mentality with this. At the very beginning, is this going to be Uber black pricing? Absolutely not. Is it going to be helicopter prices? Absolutely not. It's going to be an in-between. And we are convinced that probably $8 to $9 a mile, it's a good starting point. Now, in the US, considering the distances, that's an expensive ticket. In Europe, it's a little more affordable because the distances are smaller. However, over time, these costs will go down. And they will go down because of the maintenance that is less. And the other part that you mentioned is utilization. So at the very beginning, these eVTOLs are not going to be operated like in a 737 on an A320. As you mentioned, at the very beginning, they are VFR rated. So if there's weather, if there is night, they might not even be able to fly. However, this is not something that is permanent. With time, with the increase in the number of hours flown, this will expand to IFR, et cetera, et cetera. And so we need to very well divide between the entry into service and the long term. Now, one other point that you made that is extremely valid is we already don't have pilots. How are we going to find pilots for all of these airplanes? Now, if you have in the simulator of any of these companies and you know about this much of aerospace, you will find that they're very easy to fly. And so the whole goal here and what they call the simplified vehicle operation is to make sure that the training can be shortened. And so it won't happen at the beginning, because at the beginning, it's a little bit like, when you develop a new test car, you want to put your best people in it because you don't know. But if after you start making them 2-3 years later, you sell them to the public, I mean, you don't walk into a dealership and they ask you if you know how to drive, if you're a performance driver. They just want you to have the money and a license and insurance. And so this is the same thing that we see here. As time will go by, you will see not the training requirement reduced, but the needed amount of training reduced. And so last but not least, as I mentioned at the very beginning, at the beginning, this is not going to be the cure of all evil. And this is another, I think, misconception. There is no need for any infrastructure at the beginning, at the entry into service. So do we need all these vertiports tomorrow? No, probably we need them by 28, by 30, and that's a different story. Because at the very beginning, number one, we are going to use a lot of the infrastructure that already exists. Heliports, there's not many. However, airports, there is a lot. And airports, especially in the United States, tend to be located everywhere inside the city. And so a lot of the existing infrastructure will be used, and that will reduce the costs and the need at the very beginning. So is this going to be, a teleportation for the world? No, but it's going to be another portfolio in the transportation portfolio of a big city that it's not available right now, but will be available in the future.
When do you see, I'm not going to say mass adoption, but when do you see that the non-rich will have access to this type of transportation at an affordable cost for them?
So the unfortunate thing is rich is a very personal perspective, and it varies, right? I live in California, where rich here means 400,000 or more a year. There is other parts of the United States where rich 400,000 is filthy rich. And so it really depends. But I would say that even at the very beginning, it's not going to be rich, right? It's going to be something that someone like you and I can afford on a sporadic basis, right? We're not going to go to the mall in downtown by using one of these things or going to dinner. But once in a while, we can go to the airport with it. What we see is the mid-2030s is where there will be enough volume where these prices will start to come down towards those $3 to $4 that the OEMs have talked about. And again, I would say the projections that the Uber Elevate people had introduced, where it's going to be cheaper to fly with these things than to operate your own cars, that is a futuristic view. a hopeful view of what might happen when these things are extremely cheap to make and they're all autonomous. And so it's not going to happen anytime soon. I think we went from the very first day of Uber Elevate was a little bit of a Hail Mary. And then we went to long passing game, to short passing game, and now we're at the running game. And so we're just looking at the few yards we need to for the next down. We're not looking at scoring a touchdown that's like 60 to 80 yards away.